Hello, everybody. Welcome back for our next panel here. We're very excited to have with us on the main stage three of the English Premier League football clubs. I think you'll see some big smiles on these faces today after a convincing 2-0 win over Germany in the Euro knockout stage. We were a little bit worried what the tone would be here if the result went the other way, but I'm glad to have all of you with us. So we have Greg Baker from Southampton Football Club, Kai Rippon from the Aston Villa Foundation, and Mike Summers is from Palace for Life Foundation from Crystal Palace. Gentlemen, welcome today. We're excited to have you with us.
Thank you. Yeah,
thank you.
So let's start with Greg here. So Greg, I know we've spoken a number of times about some of the great initiatives that are going on with your club. I know all three of you share some of the same resources and bigger picture initiatives through the Premier League, but take us a little bit through the type of work and the vision of Southampton Football Club.
Yeah, so I run an organisation called the Saints Foundation, which is effectively a charity of the club. So officially an independent charity, but effectively, I guess in a similar way to what Guy and Mike would describe their organisations as, very intrinsically linked to our club. And we describe ourselves as the club's way of giving back. And effectively, we exist to try to help to transform the lives of people in and around our city, which is a city on the south coast of England, which has around 250,000 population. And effectively, we're trying to support people based on the needs of the city to fulfill their potential. So we'll be doing things right through from working with young people in primary schools who might be struggling with their mainstream education, through into adulthood, about helping people get back into work, around dealing with some of life's biggest challenges around drug and alcohol addictions, criminality issues, mental health issues in adulthood, going right up through to, we run quite a substantive older persons program. So working with older people over the age of 65 to both from a social perspective and also from a physical perspective. So doing things outside of the pandemic times around chair-based exercises, around circuits, around falls recovery. So recovery from a fall which might hospitalise them. And then across the board, a disability program that's working with people of all ages, with both cognitive and physical impairments. So we're doing quite a lot of work, which is maybe slightly different to what Mike's doing. We talk about supporting people of all ages rather than a focus necessarily on young people, particularly, although we do work with young people as well. So that's a brief overview about the type of work we do. We do a lot more, but just to, in the interest of time, I'll pass over.
Well, that's a pretty broad set of initiatives that's going to keep you really busy. So when we look at the organization and the size of the organization, tell us a little bit about sort of the staffing that you have from the foundation side.
So we employ around about 60 full-time members of staff. And around about 70 casual members of staff at any particular point in time. We turn over about 2.5 million. So what's that? About $3.5 million a year. And effectively, probably the mantra that we've got is that we directly deliver to the community. So rather than, and I'm making assumptions here, but the philanthropic way of a lot of organisations in the US, I understand to be in terms of working with other organisations around giving money to other charities within a locality. We have people that go out into those schools, into community settings, wearing effectively a Saints Foundation, a Southampton Football Club tracksuit, and delivering directly with those participants. So, yeah, so it's a fairly sizable organisation, sits within an organisation in a wider sense of about 450 people within the club setting. So we're a fairly sizable, charity or department within the club. And effectively that £2.5 million, in a similar way to Mike and Guy we'll talk about, comes from a variety of sources. We're very, very fortunate about the support that we get from the Premier League. So every Premier League club is on around about 900 grand is what we receive every year, £900,000 from the Premier League to run a number of programmes which they mandate to us in terms of running, but also an area of flexibility to be able to spend some of the money on what we choose, as well as a real massive contribution towards our core costs. And it's also probably just worth noting before I finish that the football club, whilst they don't give us any money, actually the back office support that they provide us in terms of office space, IT support, HR support is pretty substantial. So that effectively is the backbone of our business to allow us to run what we run.
So Guy, looking at Aston Villa, give us a sense in terms of how you've looked at that and your role within the foundation, how long you've been there, and similar conversation as Greg said in terms of the scale of the staffing and support you get both through the Premier League and from the club.
Of course. So I'm Guy Rippon, head of foundation at Aston Villa Football Club. As with Greg and with Mike as well, we're the registered charity of the club. We have a staff team of about 50 full-time staff. We're Birmingham, based in Birmingham. So the England's second city, it's a population of about 1.1 million people. So we tend to focus, because there's two clubs in the city, we tend to focus really with a geographical remit. So the north of Birmingham, which is where the football club is based, is one of the most diverse communities in the country. So about 95% of people that live in the north of Birmingham are from an ethnic minority background. And it's also one of the areas of the country that has some of the biggest health inequalities, educational inequalities, big problems with drugs and gangs and gun crime, etc. So the brief that I get from our chief executive is for the club to be a force for good. And that is using the brand of the football club to go out and positively impact on the lives of people in that particular kind of area. So we run about 30 programs, over 30 different programs, loosely across the sport, health, education, and inclusion agenda. So that might be working with refugee communities, it might be working with people with disabilities, it might be working with older people, as Greg said, and just supporting groups of people that have barriers to overcome in life. So we try to kind of remove some of those barriers. So I've been there for about 5 years, and it's changed a lot during the course of those 5 years. And I think that what you'll find with each football club in the UK that has its foundation is that they're all very different. There are some programs, as Greg has said, that are mandated by the Premier League that we all deliver, although they're not delivered uniformly. So what we deliver on a Premier League Kicks program will be different from what Greg delivers, and it will be different from the program that Mike runs. And that's very much down to kind of individual people that are leading the organisations. It's down to the individual partnerships and opportunities that may be there, and it's down to the individual skill sets of the staff that are within our respective teams. So we've got, as the others I'm sure have as well, we've got teachers, we've got youth workers, we've got sports tutors, we've got coaches, we've got mental health workers, broader health professionals. So we've got a real kind of talented and a fantastic pool of staff that are very much committed to using the club as a force for good and help people overcome, personal challenges. So in terms of our funding, we're about £1.8 million. Probably about 50% of that comes from grants. So some of that's Premier League, but then we can also apply to places like the National Lottery, which is big UK funder, Sport England, which is the government kind of quango body that promotes sport in communities. And being a registered charity, we can apply for lots of different money. So that's where the different partnerships come in. We also probably do about 30% of our turnover is from a more commercial offer. So that's kind of community outreach, football in the community activities. It might be selling educational programs in primary and secondary schools. And then we probably get about 20% from our fundraising. So I think that we have 3 kind of areas of focus moving forward. So young people, health and well-being, personal, social and educational development. So those are our 3 focus areas that are really aligned with local priorities in the comeback from COVID, if you like. And one of the things that we try to do, whilst we don't purely focus on young people, a lot of our work is with young people. There are low aspirations in the areas that we work. And so we work in school and out of school. We do stuff in primaries and secondary. So with children from 4 through to kind of 16. Within the school environment, we'll do stuff that's mainstream classroom, educational, bringing numeracy and literacy to life. But we also do focused work with children that are at risk of being excluded. They might be falling behind educationally, or they may just be struggling in a mainstream environment. So the in-school stuff, coupled with the free to access out of school activity, provides, we've got this kind of talk about a golden thread of educational opportunity and development for young people. We've got a big post-16 program where we do full-time education, and we're just developing a university program, a degree course as well. We also run apprenticeships, so young people can get a job with us at 16 with a government-supported initiative. And so the idea being that, the young people that come from the area where the football club's been based for over 120 years have got a pathway that they can join at any point within Aston Villa, and we will develop them, nurture them, support them, and they are our workforce of tomorrow. And we're already starting to see a lot of young people come through and working with us and for us, in the hope that in the long term, one of them will be doing my job, and it's a completely kind of local focused charity for a global brand and organisation. So I could talk about it all day, but I'll keep quiet now, and obviously happy to ask any questions. Answer any questions.
Well, it's hard when we're so passionate about our work, there's so much great effort that you're putting into the community and so many different programs. So Mike, take us through and share a little bit about the Palace for Life Foundation and how you're set up and how long you have been there and a little bit of your background.
Thanks, Roy. And thanks to Guy and Greg, because they've covered a lot of ground that's very similar to what we do at the Palace for Life Foundation, because together we're really all part of it. It sounds a bit cliche, but we're a bit of a football family in England. We work together very regularly. Only this afternoon, which would be this morning, Chicago time, but this afternoon UK time, we were on a 3-hour meeting of other Premier League clubs talking about our strategy going forward. So very similar to Greg and to Guy, Palace for Life Foundation is the official charity of Crystal Palace Football Club. As you can tell, we're all Premier League football teams. And just as Greg said about the Saints Foundation, we are intrinsically linked to the club. So although we're technically independent to the club, in so much as we're an independent registered charity, we're part and parcel of the club in every other respect. We share the brand. The club very generously supports us in lots of ways, such as providing facilities, providing the brand, providing marketing support, puts a small financial contribution into us. But overall, we, very similar to Greg and Guy, are an organisation of around about 50 full-time staff, around about 60 to 70 casual part-time staff. Similar funding mix again, so around about 40% of our funding would come from the Premier League. And that's why Greg, Guy and myself will all run some very similar programmes. But similar to Guy, I think Guy talked about 30% of his income coming from more commercial programmes like soccer schools, etc. That would be similar to ourselves. We also raise money from our fan base. So we're very proud at Crystal Palace of having a very loyal fan base who love the club. We never win anything. I don't think we've won any trophy other than something called, I think it's the LDV Bands Trophy, which is some third tier trophy about 15 years ago. So unlike Aston Villa, who've obviously won the Champions League or the European Cup as it once was, Southampton maybe haven't won so much, but you've won the FA Cup and things. Crystal Palace have never won anything. Palace have never won anything, but the fans love us for who we are. So we've got a loyal fan base. Location-wise, for those of you who don't know London, we're based in London, in South London, and there are 14 clubs in London, and we're one of the, not the most famous ones. The most famous London clubs are the likes of Arsenal, Tottenham, Chelsea. We're probably on a par more with like West Ham United and Queen's Park Rangers, Brentford, and now in the Premier League. But we all work together really closely in London as part of a group called London United. So ourselves and the other 13 London clubs regularly meet on a fortnightly basis. We make sure we're not competing with one another, because obviously London is a big city, but not so big that you don't trip over each other's toes if you're not careful. But we'll work together, particularly to put bids into the London government. So London, the Mayor of London has a funding pot for things like crime prevention, for health promotion, etc. And we'll work together with our sister London clubs to bid into that. Just in terms of the programs we run, I can just defer directly to both Greg and Guy. They listed brilliantly the kind of programs we run, very, very similar. So it's schools, community sport, targeted interventions, which is the one-to-one work with young people in particular who need a bit of extra help, maybe because they've got into trouble with the police, or, you know, they've been excluded from school. Maybe they're looked after children, so they're potentially becoming homeless at the age of 16. We also work on employability programs, helping young people get into work, disability programs. So we have a power chair football team, a Down syndrome team, teams for visually impaired people. And we also do some specialized programs for parts of the community that are underrepresented. So in London, there is a large Muslim community, but if you go to a typical football match in London or in England, you don't see many Muslim people. There tends to be a fairly white British supporter base. And one of our big EDI goals is to get more people from other ethnic backgrounds involved. So, for example, we run a strong Muslim engagement program. And that's really the picture. So very similar to Greg and Guy in terms of how we operate. And yeah, we're very proud to work as a network alongside these guys in the wider Premier League.
Well, I think what's interesting to me is the size of the staff that you each talk about. That's a substantial investment. Is that staff and infrastructure costs? Is that coming from the team, or is that something that's paid out of the foundation?
So for us, our costs, again, similar to Greg and Guy, around about, let's call it £1 million. So 1.3, $1.5 million comes from the Premier League. So the Premier League is the richest sports league in the world, I believe. They get something like $7 billion a year in terms of broadcast income. And of that, £100 million a year, so $150 million they put into good causes. And that $150 million they put into good causes, about half of that they distribute through the club network. So Southampton and Aston Villa and Palace and Arsenal and Tottenham and Man United and everybody, we are all, if you like, the recipients of that money. And we then use that money to fund our staff and to run our programs. But we do also raise money, as I said, from our fan base. So our many supporters will generously donate, or they'll take part in sponsored activities. We do a sponsored marathon march each year, 26.2 mile walk, and we'll typically raise $100,000 from that, from fans who are walking it and getting sponsorship and then making donations.
Now, what about Greg, from the player's perspective? How involved are you as the foundation in terms of working with the players themselves in any of their philanthropic initiatives?
First and foremost, we have really good access to our player base. So we have a player engagement meeting once a month, where it's decided what the players will be doing for the upcoming 4-week period. And effectively, we're probably on about 5 or 6 visits a month from the various players, going out to various programs, going to see some of our activity with young people, with adults, coming to fundraising events, et cetera, et cetera. So, and that is a lot around kind of both the education of the player to show what their club is doing, but also, moreover, as much, putting smiles on participants' faces. And that is an amazing thing. I mean, I'm a Saints fan by birth, or so Southampton Football Club, called the Saints. And I remember, seeing players when I was growing up, and it's something that I think lives long in the memory. So we're very aware of how important that is to our participants. In terms of from their philanthropic activities, we were very fortunate a year or so ago to get 1% of our players' salary. And 1% obviously doesn't sound a lot, but when you're talking about an average player salary, which is probably on a par with an NFL salary or an NBA salary, it's not too bad. So it all mounts up. And the biggest thing for us there was more around being able to engage him during his time with us rather than the money. The money was great, but actually that was secondary to being able to engage him and gain his interest. We currently have one of our players as an active ambassador who goes above and beyond for us. The others are very supportive, but we've not quite broken probably where we would like to get to in terms of the philanthropy from players. It's a difficult one because I don't think the general philanthropy within football, as in soccer in the UK, is quite where it is maybe within the professional sports leagues in America. So that's a work in progress for us. But we definitely get a huge level of support, both from current players and also from a lot of ex-players. Got 3 ex-players and ambassadors. We've got one of our ex-managers and ambassadors, and they do an awful lot for us. They're a little bit more accessible at times in terms of coming and helping us. And I know the same will go for Guy and Mike. I know they've got some great ambassador support from some of their ex-players. So in terms of, we haven't probably got there yet in terms of where we would love to be able to have a conversation with the player about finding the sweet spot about what inspires them. It will come, but it's work in progress for us.
Guy, how about at Aston Villa? What does it look like in terms of your engagement with the player and your opportunity to really shape their philanthropic mindset?
It's a difficult question. To be completely honest, we don't get as much access to players as I would like. But I think that what's important is that when you do it, you're doing it genuinely, and that it's not just something that's for the cameras, and it's not something that is just that people can see through. So I would personally rather have kind of less player involvement, but when we do get players, it means something. And I think that there's probably, football players in the UK live in a bubble, literally at the moment with COVID, but they normally live in a bubble as well, that, they can be quite suspicious of people outside of football. So they do tend to keep themselves. And I think that, when we do work with players, we get them along to some of the events that we're running. That sometimes they're a little bit surprised about how much they actually enjoy it. And I think that's the key is giving them opportunities to do visits or attend events that do have a bit of an interest for them. And then you're more likely to get them back. So, it is within player contracts. Obviously, we don't they're not held specifically to those. And to be completely honest, I would only like to have a player involved if he wants to be there. We've got a lot of relationships, as Greg has said, with former players and former managers who are fantastic. I think, they've come out the other side of the game and perhaps a little bit more relaxed and in some ways probably like to keep involved with the club and like to keep a little bit in the public eye. But in terms of player and their own philanthropic efforts and their own foundations, I think that we've got probably 2 players at the moment that have their own charities that they run outside. We've had kind of initial conversations with some of their representatives, but it's always difficult trying to manage what could be a bit of a conflict of interest, with them. So it's an interesting challenge. And like I say, we probably don't get as much as we would like, but when we do, I do like to think that actually it has meaning and it has depth and it is genuine and the fans, genuinely sort of buy into it and appreciate what the players are doing.
So Mike, it's interesting because you look at the name Palace for Life Foundation. So, is that something that you're getting that type of cooperation from the former players? Are they part of this foundation for life as after they've completed their career? And as Guy said, you raised the issue of conflict of interest. How many players are you seeing coming out of Crystal Palace that have their own foundations that they maintain when they're done with their career?
So with Crystal Palace, and we're probably in a very similar level to Aston Villa and Southampton, we don't have many players that will set up their own foundations. That our players are not at the very, very top tier in the way that, say, Manchester United or Liverpool or Chelsea might be. Similar to Guy, we've got 2 or have had 2 players with their own foundations. One is a guy called Wilfried Zaha, but Wilfried comes from the Ivory Coast and he focuses his foundation work on raising money to send back home to the Ivory Coast, and doesn't specifically focus on local work. The other player that we're linked to who left Palace 2 years ago is called Aaron Wan-Bissaka, and he went to Manchester United, and he's just setting up his own foundation called the Spider Foundation, and we're working currently with his agents to help set that up. And even though he's moved away from Palace, his roots were from the local area, and he wants to do a foundation that jointly raises money for Manchester United and Crystal Palace. So that's quite a nice synergy for us. But otherwise, we're very similar situation to Guy and Greg in that we get players will come and visit some of our programs. when a player goes to visit a school, it's amazing. And the kids in the school are just so delighted and excited. And I'm sure many kids become Palace fans for life off the back of having a player come and visit them. So that's probably where the greatest strength comes from. Again, former players tend to have more time on their hands and tend to be more supportive. There's a former player of Palace called Jeff Thomas, who played a few games for England. He played for Palace back in the 90s, and he had got leukemia when he was around about mid-30s, and thankfully survived leukemia. But off the back of that, he's got heavily involved with a charity called Cure Leukemia. And Crystal Palace Football Club has got massively behind that. He's done European cycle rides. He's done another cycle ride recently. So through him, we indirectly get involved in raising money for leukemia. But that's because Jeff Thomas has a specific interest in that area.
So Greg, as you look at the organizations you work with in the community, I'm sure the need and the demand is much greater than the amount of available dollars or pounds and resources that are there. So how do you make those determinations as to which groups you're going to work with?
So I've been in the organisation for 6 or 7 years, and this is not in any way to deride what we were doing previously, but we were spreading ourselves far too thin, and we were doing things that I don't think were necessarily based on need. We were sort of going where people asked, and probably everyone on the call, if you work for a sports organisation, and certainly for myself, Guy and Mike, we get calls every day from organisations saying, come and work with us, come and put your badge on this, come and do this with us. So we were doing that far too much. And we made a conscious decision 5 or 6 years ago, really to scale back in terms of the geographic location for our work. So we now work in a very finite geographical area. As I say, Southampton as a city is actually quite small. It's got 250,000 people. So when you put that in the context of Birmingham, and particularly in terms of London, actually it's quite a small city. So we effectively stopped our work outside of the city boundaries, and we work very, very, very closely, have an amazing relationship with the local authority, so Southampton City Council, and we will effectively do things based on the needs that they tell us they have. So ultimately, the statistics and the anecdotal evidence that is coming through from the city is what effectively we will respond to. We will also work very, very closely with the community around trying to work with them to find out what their needs are. And we increasingly talk about ourselves as a needs-led organisation. So I think in the past, we've probably been guilty of doing things to people, popping up programmes that no one's really asked for and hoping that people come. Whereas actually we're now trying to work with the community from inception to try to deliver programs. That doesn't mean that we're ever going to meet the demand and the need in the city. So, if we look at our older persons program, which I'm really proud of, operates around about 25 sessions a week on a normal basis out in community settings. And currently we're doing a lot of radio shows and Zoom broadcasts of exercise programs and phone calls, et cetera, we're probably reaching about 500 older people a week. Now, the statistics tell us that in Southampton, there's about 25,000 older people who probably could do with some support around their health and social engagement as an older person over the age of 25, over the age of 65. So ultimately, we know we're scratching the surface, but we're trying our best. But ultimately, what I would say is, we are responding to the needs of the city. We're working in the high, what we call areas of deprivation, based on some indices that the UK government publish. We're working around the statistical needs that the City Council are telling us. And probably what is really important for me to note is actually, whilst we use football or soccer as a tool of engagement, actually decreasingly are we using football as actually the actual product. So we're using football as a way to engage young people and adults, but actually sometimes a football is never seen within our session. So with our work with older people, actually the badge does draw people in. I think we feel like a neutral environment, that maybe they're not being judged, they're not going to the National Health Service, they're not going to the City Council, but they're coming to a neutral kind of positive environment within the city. But ultimately, there is lots of work going on, but ultimately it's based on need. It's decreasingly actually having football at your feet, but it's always using football as a tool for engagement around that positive engagement with young people. For example, we've got full-time members of staff in 8 of the secondary schools in the city. Again, football as the actual game is decreasingly used, but it's that aspirational figure, that role model that is accessible to young people within that school environment that is increasingly important. But ultimately, we know in reality we're not doing everything that we could be. Over the time, we'll get there, but it will be, for us, it will be about filling that need rather than geographically increasing in size.
So it sounds, if I'm understanding the way you described it, that most of the decision making, then you're saying, is coming through like the city council and other groups that are defining those needs, as opposed to an internal evaluation of people submitting applications to you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we are not a grant maker. We ultimately deliver direct services. So we would work. I mean, ultimately, the decision comes down to myself and the team about what we want to spend our time doing. But we will be very much led by the data that we have available to us by the City Council around where ultimately our resources are going to be best spent. So, so that will either be to place programs that we already have within our portfolio. For example, the programs that Mike and Guy also run around some of our Primary Stars programs, around our Kicks programs, which is engaging with young people. But it would also be, we might work. So taking one example, we have a very close relationship with our local NHS trust, so the National Health Service, which I'm sure everyone on the call has heard about. We have identified collectively alongside them and the City Council a need for men's mental health support in the city because suicide rates are high. We know that men are presenting to the hospital far, far too late, and actually the ability to be able to do something tangible at that stage is actually diminished because they needed support 6 months ago rather than now. We also know that we have, or we think we have, a very accessible, neutral brand that people will buy into. We know that men will engage with the football club because they're generally Saints fans, for example. So we're working with them collectively. We've identified the need. We know what the program's going to look like. We now don't need to go and find funding. So we will go to those parties like Mike and Guy spoke about earlier, to go to the National Lottery Fund, to go to our trusts and foundations in the UK. So actually we're the opposite side. We're the ones looking for money as opposed to the ones that are offering money, which is probably the difference between the general gist of what we do in the UK generally within our sports club foundations. We are seeking money from central government. We're seeking money from trusts and foundations, as opposed to giving out money. Although I think some clubs, Guy, you might have a very small community engagement fund in terms of making grants, but generally we are a grant receiver rather than a grant giver.
So Guy, how does that differ for you for Aston Villa?
It's fairly similar. So as Greg said, we've got a small pot of money that we give out, small grants to local organisations. So part of the bigger picture, the area that we're based in is, I mentioned, very diverse community, and you don't have one or two community leaders in the area that we focus on. You probably have 100 or 200, and lots of different nationalities, lots of different pockets of religions, and so we very much see our remit as outreach to support those groups, to identify and support those groups. So they're doing some brilliant work, and they don't get much support from the local government or from the national government. Quite often these people are doing fantastic work without any money. They're just doing it on goodwill. So we kind of taken it on ourselves really to be a bit of a kind of an advocate, a bit of a big brother to try and support them, in the belief that collectively we can have a greater impact using the resources and the skills and the expertise that we've got, and the sort of fact that these people and these groups are embedded in the local area. They're known, they're respected. They've been born there, they've been raised there, they will probably die there, and they've been around long before I joined Aston Villa, and they'll be around long after. So I think our approach is that we're very much there to try and capacity build, capability and capacity build. So it's quite difficult with, how we choose who we're going to be working with. And I think you just get a feeling for groups and organisations. There has to be, a similarity in the principles of how they operate. And, they have to be open to a collaborative approach and a proper relationship, a functional relationship, rather than just a financial or a transactional one. So we've got a couple of members of staff whose job is purely to develop partnerships with different organisations in the local area. One is very neighbourhood based, So her job involves going out and attending lots of different neighbourhood meetings and talking to lots of different neighbourhood groups. And then we have another partnerships manager whose job is to look at the more strategic conversations, as Greg has talked about, with the local NHS or the local police or the local authority. So we're proactively, and we, like I say, we've got this small department that is their remit to identify these groups. So it goes back to the kind of vision of being a force for good, and Aston Villa being a good neighbour, contributing positively to the local community. And that doesn't just mean us parachuting in and delivering, free sports sessions or educational programs. It means capacity building with those other individuals, community leaders and small organisations that do the work, but they don't know how to access funding in the way that we do, because we may have a professional bid writer. So yeah, we kind of pride ourselves on the links that we've established, and this big, beautiful kind of brown brick stadium that shuts the whole community down once every 2 weeks. When the crowds are coming in, actually it's open and accessible, and it supports people locally. And it's not just a pain in the backside. It actually becomes a community hub and a community asset. So we're really passionate about the capacity building of other organisations in the local area. And it's not always financial. It's knowledge, it's expertise. It might be just donating a little bit of kit and equipment, which to us isn't a huge thing, but to some of these people and groups, it's absolutely massive.
So you raised an interesting point there, Guy, which is talking about you talked about the grant writing and soliciting and building capacity, because that's something that we're passionate about. So many organizations spend much of their time, often an inordinate amount of their time, trying to raise small amounts of money to sustain their ability to deliver services. And a group like a Premier League club has access and resources that it can go to those higher powers, be it the Premier League, be it the government, be it other sponsors that can support that work. So, as you look at that from a organizational perspective, how many people do you have working on that? We'll call it fundraising, grant requesting types of services versus direct service delivery.
Quite small, to be honest. So the way we're structured, I've got a senior management team of 6 people. So we have a workforce manager, we have a partnerships manager, operations manager, we have a delivery manager, etc. So we have one fundraising officer. So her job is purely doing some of the events that Mike's talked about, raising money from fun runs or abseiling off the stadium if you really want to do that. Jumping out of a plane, so lots of different kind of events. So we have one person doing that, and underneath our senior management team we have 8 departmental managers, so they all manage their own little delivery teams. So the majority of our workforce is delivery, as Greg said. That's perhaps where it's slightly different to the traditional American model, and part of the funding applications is done either by the departmental managers or it's done by the senior management team or myself. So it's a shared responsibility, and I think it's really important to just clarify that we don't chase funding. We don't have people that work on it full time, just constantly writing bids and applications. The strongest projects come from where there is a need being identified, as Greg has talked about, where you identify the priorities, you identify the community groups that I've mentioned that are going to help you and that can help you reach people and have an impact with people. Then you go and you look for the funding. So we've got a number of people that are kind of skilled and in doing it, but it's one tiny little aspect of their role. And I think that we've grown a lot in the last kind of 4 or 5 years since I've been there. We went from 5 people to 50 full-time people, and it's not done through chasing funding. It's done through delivering excellent projects, and that is from an engagement point of view with how you work with children, young people, or isolated adults, and it's the experience they get, but it's also the experience that your partners get. It's the experience that your funders get and the local authority. So that's doing good impact reports. It is, turning up to meetings and leading meetings and going above and beyond expectations. And, our kind of firm belief, and I'm sure, Greg and Mike share the same opinion, that is if you do things well, opportunities will come to you. you know, rather than being an organisation that is known to just try and it's all about pounds, shilling and pence. So, you know, I think quite often you know, there's a thing in sort of foundations to talk about, you know, what the turnover is, and it's almost seen that that's a measure of your success. But actually, for me, I don't care how big we are. I don't care if we're the smallest, as long as we have that strong reputation and we deliver powerful, impactful programs that help individuals, help communities, and help some of these groups that I've mentioned that we support.
Well, and we've all seen a lot of sports organizations that have focused really on, we'll call it the celebrity type of functions. I think you guys mentioned earlier, when you look at making an appearance, players making an appearance or signing memorabilia or things of that nature, and having programs, guys, you talked about, it's really the impact measurement that is what's going to define the success of the organization. You know, Mike, you've got some different challenges, right? Being in a market with 14 clubs compared to what Greg and Guy face in terms of their communities and having, let's say, more of a stronghold on the identity of the community. When you're sitting there in the London marketplace, how do you carve out a niche for Palace for Life?
I guess we're in the fortunate position. London is a big city, so the population of London is something between 8 and 10 million people. So even a 10th of that or a 14th of that is probably still bigger than Southampton is, I suspect. So the way we work with the other London clubs is we do all have carved out areas. So London is split into 33 boroughs. We have 3 boroughs that are assigned to us, Croydon, Bromley and Sutton, but each of those will have populations of around 200,000 or 300,000 people each. And the other key thing is that we're not generally competing with each other for fundraising, because most of our fundraising will come from our fans. So Crystal Palace fans will happily donate to Crystal Palace, and Fulham fans or Tottenham fans will happily donate to Tottenham, but we're generally not competing for those people. I think the way English football works is you grow up, and if you're a Crystal Palace fan, you're a Crystal Palace fan. You're never going to donate money to Aston Villa or to Southampton, and vice versa. So it works well. And actually in London, often the funding sources are from organisations that want a pan-London solution. And the only way you could win a pan-London funding bid is to work with all the other London clubs, because the Mayor of London isn't interested in funding just one small section of London. He wants to fund the whole of London. So it's working together actually helps us.
So break that down for us a little bit. You talked about fundraising from the fans. So I want to go around and hear this from each of you. I know that different markets, that strategy has worked to different extents. How does that work for Crystal Palace in terms of the percentage of the operating budget? What amount of that is raised from fans?
Around about 20%. So around about somewhere between £300,000 and £400,000 a year. And that's a mixture of money that we raise from lots of individual fans who at the lowest end of the market will be taking part in our super draw. So every match day we have a super draw, which used to be done face-to-face in the stadium, but it's now all done online. As you can imagine, we've had no crowds in the stadium for 15 months. And that will raise around about £40,000 a year. And I know, Greg, you run a similar program with the same organisation, actually. We have our sponsored walk, which raises around about £70,000, $100,000 a year. We'll have a sponsored cycle ride that will raise around about £20,000. And then we have some major donors. And the major donors range from people giving us around about £1,000 a year, all the way up to one individual who gives us £50,000 a year. And those major donors are wealthy supporters of Crystal Palace. So you add all those things together and it comes to that kind of figure. And it's one of the big areas we want to grow. And we, again, trading off our brand as a sort of family club, as a club that people love to support. We're never going to win the Champions League or the Premier League, but we could be the best community club in London.
We'll never say never, right? We've seen some great stories of clubs coming up and having a great surprise to make a run to the title. But Greg, how does that compare with Southampton in terms of fundraising from fans?
Yeah, so I think just to pick up on Mike's point about football fans are partisan, they're absolutely committed to their club. The only thing that I would add is we've got a KPI within our own fundraising about trying to actually unlock funds from people that aren't football fans at all. So currently, most of our fundraising will come from people that buy into us because they are ultimately Southampton Football Club fans. What we want to also identify ourselves is the best place to put your philanthropic donation to support the young people and adults of Southampton. So we have a real marker about trying also to be something that is away from sort of the general football, that people aren't just donating for football reasons and because they are fans. Now, we know that ultimately most of our money is going to come through fans, and we talk about the fundraising events we do always having to have a Saints USP. So we avoid doing things that other charities in the local area could do. So we will always say that it's going to be based at the stadium. It's going to have players involved. It's going to be, it's basically, it has to be unique to us. No other charity could do it. And ultimately, we're not going to try and compete with other charities to do what they do. So we do. So we, as I said before, we're due to turn over about 2.5 million this year, and of that, 670,000 in our budget comes from fundraising. So public fundraising effectively. So it's a pretty big target, and whether we'll meet it or not is a different matter, but that's what we're aiming for. And that comes from, we do an annual bike ride. So we have fans that ride a bike. We went up to Crystal Palace, and Palace for Life participants joined us on that ride before, but this year we're going to do 20 stadiums on a bike. So the UK is a fairly small country, but at the same time, it's a bit of a challenge for people to take that. It's our 20th anniversary next year, so we're doing a lot of 20 themed events. We do the Super Draw in Stadia, previously, as Mike alluded to, via the same company, which is very much on a sort of an American 50-50 lotto model. And the idea was to try to bring that to the UK. We do an annual dinner, which raises about £100,000, which is sort of an annual showcase of what we do. We do something called Matthew Letizia is our biggest ever player, our biggest alumni, a superstar locally. He hosts a quiz for us at the stadium, which brings in a bit of money. And we also have major donors, as Mike alluded to, both, again, probably ranging from, we don't get a £50,000 donation, unfortunately, we'd love to, but ours are ranging from £1,000 up to about £10,000 from individuals. And then we also have an auction site as well. So I think similarly to Guy and to Mike, all of us do, we have great access to player worn items. So we have shirts off the players' backs from particular games. We have their boots, we have their old training gear, and we sell that off. We list about 10 items a week, and we raise about £50,000 from that per year, just out of, people buying the shirt of their favourite player, the boots of their favourite player. So we're fortunate to have that link into our club to be able to unlock that week in, week out.
Guy, how does that compare on your end for the fundraising from the fan side?
Sorry, just unmute myself. First one of the meeting, apologies. We're probably not quite as advanced as Greg and Mike. We've our fundraising fundraising officer joined us probably about 18 months ago. So a little bit before COVID. And I think that, we're very conscious about going back to the same people, asking them to make donations, particularly at a time when there's a lot of economic uncertainty and a lot of economic impact, negative impact on people. So it's a difficult balance for me. I kind of say to the staff, we don't want to continuously be asking the fan base for money, particularly when people hear about how much players are earning, and there's a very simple question: why aren't the players doing it if you're asking us to do it? So I think that to counter that, we try to do initiatives where there's a benefit to people. Now we've started recently doing sort of medal campaigns, so we'll produce some bespoke medals that we did a Jack Grealish, who's kind of Aston Villa and England's sort of pin-up boy at the moment. Where we know that he runs about 10 kilometers a game, so we got some really nice kind of bespoke medals made up, encouraging people to take part in a 10k challenge and run a total or walk a total of 10k's over I think it was a month period. So it allowed people of all ages to do it. They got a specialist kind of unique item at the end of it, unique piece of memorabilia. it got people out and got people active at a time when it's easy to kind of sit at home, sit in front of computers all day, every day. And obviously activity is good for sort of physical and mental well-being. So it was encouraging people to get out as well. So for me, there's that kind of thing just has a bit more of a tangible benefit, both to the foundation in terms of, you know, the £25,000 that we raised for that. So, you know, $35,000 that we raised through that one medal campaign. But also there's a benefit to people, a nice collector's item, gets them out and about, gets them active as families. And I think that we also encourage people to share their stories and their achievements on social media. So it also created a great awareness about the foundation and some of the programs we were doing, and just create a kind of strong, close relationship with some of the fans. So I think that perhaps because we're not quite as you know, far developed as Greg and Mike, you know, over the last kind of 12 months with all the restrictions from COVID, we probably haven't been as impacted as they, you know, I don't know, I can't speak on your behalf, but our fundraising levels actually went up, you know, because they were, I think we raise about sort of £150,000 a year. So they went up during the pandemic because of things like the medal campaign, rather than necessarily down because we weren't able to run in-person events. So like I say, not kind of speaking on their behalf, but we've got plans to develop, but I just think we need to be kind of mindful of the wider economic environment. And I definitely, you know, it's very much on our radar to look at sort of higher net worth individual giving. And that is about, for me, is about attaching a specific program that is aligned with the interests of a potential funder or donator. And I think people want to know where their money's gone, rather than, you know, a cheque for £5,000 that just kind of goes into the, you know, the £2 million turnover for us. And I'm sure these guys will agree that it's very much, we're fundraising for this particular program, or we're looking for donations to really have an impact on this particular group of people.
Well, it's probably just worth adding. So anecdotally, to Guy's point, our fundraising did go down quite significantly last year because we weren't able to run those in-person events. But I do think that probably, well, certainly in the UK, certainly locally to us, and probably in the US as well, those people that have had the ability to give, that need has become ever more prevalent, you know, in terms of front of mind. It's been the front of the papers. It's been the talking point of actually, you know, whether that's isolated older people or whether that's food poverty, et cetera, et cetera. So actually, we found that those people that have the ability to give have been more prepared to give. And we think we're in a really good place to do the job that they want us to do with the local community. We've also seen, whilst we don't do it for this reason, ultimately, all of our activities are free. So we don't charge any of our participants to come to activities. And we've seen an increasing number of older adults in particular want to pay their way. You know, so ultimately, I've got a number of checks here, for example, that come through the post that I need to pay in. So these are donations from participants who they think have had a really good benefit to them, the programs that we deliver for free. So ultimately, this is not expected, but obviously this is really welcome from those participants who say, I feel like I want to support you as an organisation because ultimately you've supported me.
Well, Greg, Guy, Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. Very insightful to hear about the work that you're doing in your communities and learning some of the differences between the way that it's approached through the Premier League. And, you know, in our next panel, we're going to hear from some of the U.S. Professional sports teams. So it'll be an interesting comparison to learn how they approach these same issues. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Roy.
Thank you, Roy.
Thank you, Roy.
For everyone else, we're going to take just a quick break here before the top of the hour, and we'll be back with panelists from the Miami Dolphins, San Francisco 49ers, Chicago Blackhawks, and Minnesota Twins. We look forward to seeing you in just a few minutes. Thank you.